Hey there, my wedding planning friends, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, thanks so much for clicking on my video. I'm Emily Summer. I'm a wedding planner based in Montana, and I make weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice. So this video is going to be the first one of a series that I'm doing where I break down planning your wedding in like month chunk time frames. So today's video will be all about what you should be doing during the wedding planning process 9 to 12 months out from your wedding date. So 9 to 12 months from your wedding date is where a lot of people will start the planning process. A lot of couples that come to me are recently engaged and are planning a wedding date that is about 9 to 12 months from the time that they got engaged. So this is pretty much a standard starting point. Plenty of people get engaged longer than that and have longer engagements than that, and so maybe if that's you, if you're in that boat, then you've done a lot of these things already. But for the sake of this video, we're going to pretend that if you're in the 9 to 12 month out from your wedding date, you're likely just starting the wedding planning process. So after you've celebrated your engagement, you've taken some time, just the two of you, to enjoy this and not make any big decisions right away. So the first thing you're gonna do is figure out your budget. And I know this is probably the least exciting part of your wedding planning. And as soon as you get engaged, you're probably going to be looking at Pinterest and Instagram and looking at dresses and looking at all the fun stuff. But the very first actionable item that you should do is figure out your budget and also figure out where the money's coming from. So are you and your partner paying for the wedding? Do you guys have help from parents, from family members? How is this wedding going to come to fruition? So that's going to be the very first thing that you sit down and talk about. I have a video all about wedding budgets that I'll link for you too, that'll go in a lot more detail on this step. And then once you have a budget or a rough idea of your budget, the next thing you're gonna do is figure out your guest count. So each of you sit down and write a list for each of your sides as to how many guests you plan to invite and see what your total number is, and also see if that corresponds with your budget. So as I've said in previous videos, your guest count really determines the overall amount of money you're going to spend, because so many factors, so many vendors, so many aspects of your wedding really rely on how many guests you have there. And so the more guests that you invite, the more expensive your wedding is going to be. So just keep that in mind when you are making out your guest list and figuring out exactly how many guests you can afford to have at your wedding. Once you have those two things, you can start looking into vendors and start actually booking your vendors. I have some clients that want to just book every vendor during this 9 to 12 month period of time and just have everything knocked out, which is totally fine. But if you feel overwhelmed by having to make all these decisions right away, that's okay. You don't have to do everything right away. A lot of vendors do book out about a year in advance. However, not all of them. And if there are vendors that you don't have one specific person that you really want to work with, like photographer, for example, there are so many photographers in my area, and I'm sure it's the same wherever you are, that unless you have one specific person that you really want to book, you can wait a little while and be able to kind of see what is going to be available during that time if you're not ready to make that decision yet. And that goes for a few vendors. So anyone that you for sure have your eye on that you want to book, you should be booking during this 9 to 12 month period. But if you're unsure, if you still want to do your research, you can do that in the next step. Vendors that you should be booking during this time, though, are your venue. Venue is going to be the number one thing that you need to book in order to reserve your date, send out invitations, save the dates. All of that stuff is going to hinge on whether you have a venue or not. So finding your venue and finding your date are going to go hand in hand. So if you have a very particular date in mind, whether that's an anniversary or a parent's anniversary or some date that's meaningful for you that you know you want to have for your wedding date, then you're likely going to be finding your venue based on that date. If you don't have a particular date, then you're likely going to be basing your date off your venue, if that makes sense. So a lot of venues, like I said, book up about a year in advance. So if there's a particular venue that you have in mind that you want, you're likely going to choose your date based on what's available rather than picking a date and then hoping that venue is available. So it's a little bit easier to go in with some flexibility so that you are able to book whatever dream venue you want, based on their availability. So you've got your budget done, you've got your guest count figured out, you have your venue and your date set. Then you can start securing other vendors. So you really want to prioritize securing your vendors during this stage more than the overall theme and design and decor and all of that stuff. I know that that's kind of where a lot of brides' minds gravitate towards in the beginning planning process. And that's okay to think about and do idea generation and all of that, but don't focus on booking or making any of those decisions during this process, and shift your focus and your priority to securing the vendors that you want. Catering should ideally be secured during this time frame as well. You'll have plenty of time to figure out your actual menus and specific items, but you want to make sure that you have a caterer secured and you have at least a deposit down and they have your date reserved. This goes for food and alcohol. If you are using two different vendors, some caterers will provide alcohol catering as well. If not, then you'll need a separate caterer for alcohol, and so just book those at the same time during this time frame. This is also when you want to hire a planner if you plan to. So a lot of my clients come to me about a year from their wedding date, sometimes even longer than that. And whether you're hiring just a day of coordinator or a full service wedding planner, this is still when you want to book them, because regardless of if you're just hiring them for the date and if their job doesn't really start until the month before your wedding, you still want to have them secured, because I book out over a year in advance. And so to just have you on the books, even if we don't talk for 6 months, at least you have that person secured for your wedding date and you don't have to worry about it down the road. Like I mentioned earlier, you can also book your photographer during this time frame, especially if you have a particular one in mind. But really, those are the bulk of the vendors that you should be for sure securing during this 9 to 12 month time frame. To set yourself up for the next steps, this is also when you can start thinking about what you want for your overall vision, your overall theme, design, colors, color palette, all of that sort of thing. You don't have to make any specific decisions or reserve anything based on those decisions, but just kind of idea generation, brainstorming, create your Pinterest boards. Hot tip for the Pinterest boards, to organize them. If you're somebody that's had a wedding Pinterest board since you were in high school when Pinterest started, or whatever it may be for you, go through and organize that and see if those are things that you even want anymore. Delete anything that doesn't speak to you, that you don't care about anymore, and actually categorize your Pinterest board, and it's going to help you with the planning process so much better, especially if you have a wedding planner, so that they can go in and look at that as well. And if it's nice and organized by categories, like your flowers, dress, bridal party attire, table settings, categorize that into specific categories within your wedding Pinterest board, and it's going to make your life a lot easier. You also want to start thinking about your wedding dress during this time. You don't have to start shopping yet necessarily. However, looking at pictures, getting a sense of what your style might be, and researching and looking at places and figuring out where you might want to have your dress appointments to try on wedding dresses is a good idea during this time frame. Like I said, you don't have to start shopping quite yet if you're not ready. However, some bridal shops will be booked out maybe even a month in advance, and so figuring out where you want to go and at least booking those appointments and figuring out when you want to start shopping is a good idea during this time frame, so that you're not feeling rushed, so that you can have plenty of time to shop more than once if that's something you want to do, and have enough time to order your wedding dress with enough time before your wedding. Also, make sure that you are researching the lead time on wedding dresses based on where you plan on shopping. So at my store, most of our dresses are about 5 months. And so there are some that are longer. There's some that are 12 months before your wedding date that it takes to order a dress. If that's the case, obviously now is when you want to start shopping. But just figure out those things, do your research, and understand your lead time based on where you plan to shop for your wedding dress. So it's 9 to 12 months out before your wedding date, and you are well on your way for planning your wedding and checking some of those big ticket items off of your list. Stay tuned for the next video in this series where we'll talk about everything that you should be doing 8 months before your wedding. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to get weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice, and we will see you next week.